What's up, everybody? Got a little bit of news. Left It Wall recently won Best Feature at the Pro to Post International Film Festival in Genoa, Italy. You know what's crazy? I didn't even know the film festival was based in Italy when we applied. But yeah, Left It Wall won Best Feature. We are very, very honored and humbled for the award, and thank you so much to everyone at the Pro to Post International Film Festival for including us and selecting us for this amazing honor. And you can catch Left It Wall now. It is out now. It is on a bunch of platforms: Apple TV, YouTube Movies, Google Play, Amazon, Xbox, and you can watch it for free on Tubi. Left It Wall is on Tubi. Tubi's my favorite. I got to be honest. Tubi is my favorite. It is free there, so come on. How can you go wrong? It's free. Left It Wall, Tubi, or anywhere else. But on Tubi, it's free. All right. Peace. Episode 115. Steve Cerulli. Steve Cerulli is an Italian-American historian. Like Steve, I'm an Italian-American too. The Italian-American identity seems to be very right-wing presenting, at least in the mainstream. But that is far from reality. Steve's work has exposed why that is the case in the contemporary United States, the scam that is Columbus Day, and so much more. In a landscape where all of the most powerful Italian-American organizations are praising Trump, Steve is among the voices of opposition. Please welcome to the show, Steve Cerulli. Steve Cerulli, good to talk to you, man, and good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are a historian working on the PhD, and I know we talked about this off mic. I hope it's okay. I mentioned it. You just passed the comps because that's a big deal.
Yeah. So I'm on the modern history track at Fordham University, which is in the Bronx. I study the Italian diaspora, which is Italians leaving Italy and going all over the world. My focus is mainly on Italians in North America, and I have a particular interest in how they can construct their identities over time and how that develops historically.
Yeah, well, and that's how I discovered you, and we're going to dive into all that. But I like to kind of start at the beginning a little bit. So where did you grow up?
So I have a very untraditional trajectory to academia, and also a traditional kind of Italian-American story. I grew up across the street from where my father grew up, in the same neighborhood my grandparents grew up, and one great-grandparent. It's a place called The Cove. It's in Stanford. It was a multi-ethnic immigrant neighborhood, always has been, still is today, though it is gentrifying. My family's been there so long that there was a relative who I descend from, who fought in the Risorgimento, the war for Italian unification, who died a couple blocks from where I grew up. So I grew up in this really kind of working class, kind of New Deal-ish type of neighborhood. And I was actually a tradesman for my early adulthood as an electrician. And then the 2008 recession happened, and that began my slow descent into academia.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you decided, had you done undergrad before becoming an electrician, or?
No. I actually went to a trade school. I'm from a really, really blue collar family.
Okay.
None of my grandparents graduated high school. My parents don't have bachelor's degrees. So my dad was actually a tradesman. He was a tool maker. My grandfather was a tradesman. He was a tinsmith. Both on that side, my Cerulli line, both of those great grandfathers were tradesmen as well. I was an electrician, and I was the first in my family to attend undergraduate and complete a bachelor's degree in the 20-teens, mainly because I lost my job during the recession. And at that time, there was this program where you could collect unemployment money while attending community college or going to a trade school. And obviously I wasn't going to go to a trade school because I already had a trade. So I was like, let me go to community college. I have a couple friends that go there. And that's kind of how I began my trajectory into higher education. Was in kind of 2008, 2009, really when it started to impact me, recession and the kind of Keynesian social policy, very limited Keynesian social policy that was passed in that time period.
Wow. So you just kind of started, for the university standpoint, you kind of really just started at the beginning and kept going.
Yeah, I was literally in the remedial English and math classes because I had no clue how to write.
Wow.
And so I did an associate's, and then did a bachelor's, and did the master's, excuse me. And then now, for the past 2.5 to 3 years, I've been working on a doctorate. But all this time working here in between, like I said, I'm a really kind of blue collar, working class family. The old school kind of white ethnic, never leaves a neighborhood type of mentality that I had growing up. So now, yeah, I'm working on this doctorate about my people.
Yeah. So is it both sides Italian American for you?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, despite being 5 generations in this country on my father's side, I'm third. I'm between 2 and 3 on my mother's, and between five and 3 on my father's generations American. So I truly am this kind of hyphenated individual where I'm not Italian. I'm not just American, like, WASP, Anglo-Saxon, that kind of stuff. I'm really hyphenated. English is my first language, though. I can read Italian. I can speak a little bit. Can't write it. I can barely write English, to be honest. But yeah, so I consider myself a really hyphenated Italian American. To me, that's my identity. I'm not Italian. I'm Italian hyphen American, which is itself kind of an assimilated identity, and I have no problem running away from that. It's true.
Well, and we're really going to dive into this because I have similar thoughts to you. It's one of those identities that is taken in different directions by different people, which in some ways is really a beautiful thing, and I think kind of speaks to the kind of dynamics of the sunny peninsula that our ancestors came from. But it's also kind of interesting to dive into because I think there's a lot of I think there might be some misconceptions out there too, or some things that are kind of overlooked. And well, what made you want to do history then?
Yeah. So as I've said, I kind of grew up around a lot of my extended family, my great uncles. My great grandmother was still in my neighborhood when I was really young. She died when I was about 6. So I was kind of always surrounded by like Italianness. Though always more or less taking it for granted, but it never had much deep thought of it. It was something that we were, but it was kind of one ethnicity in a neighborhood full of ethnicities, right? And when I entered, it's just not like a little Italy. My town, Stanford, where the Cove is, had a little Italy, the West Side. I had family there too. The Cove was always this kind of mosaic of a neighborhood: German, Slovak, Italian, Irish, Polish, and then growing up, Guatemalan, Peruvian, West Indian, Bangladeshi, etc. And when I went to college, I kind of had no idea what I was doing because we never planned for college. That was just something my parents couldn't afford to put me through school, and taking out loans was something we didn't do. We're a real penny pinching family. From my dad's side, literally, my grandparents penny pinchers, my parents penny pinchers. So I kind of stumbled my way into history. I liked it as a kid. It was one of the subjects I was better at. Though, if you asked me when I was like 15 years old, "Are you going to be a historian?" I wouldn't have said, "Yeah, that's what I want to be." I ended up doing this liberal arts degree in the community college that transferred up to a 4-year degree. I said, I like history. Let me do this. I was originally, when I was considering doing the history undergraduate degree, I really wanted to do European history. I wanted to look at like fascism, anti-fascist, like the development of like socialist and liberal thought in Europe. My undergraduate advisor, Joe Blatt, was an expert on fascism and anti-fascism in Italy and France.
What are his thoughts on what's going on right now? Is he still in the U.S.?
Yeah, he's like 80 something years old.
Okay.
He was sounding the alarms in like 2015, which was when I was actually my senior year. In 2015, he was already sounding the alarms, as were many historians of fascism. But however, I wanted to do this undergrad thesis, and I got stuck in the school for an extra year because I needed to take Spanish because I had no language skills. So I needed to take Spanish for 2 years, and I didn't end up taking my first Spanish course into my second year, which was a kind of blessing in disguise because it gave me the space to do a really deep honors thesis. And for my honors thesis, I ended up looking at anti-fascism within the Italian American community. Right. It was just like pure coincidence. It was literally like, oh, I want to do something anti-fascism. And obviously I'm an undergrad, so I can't go to Italy to do research. But I could go to the New York Public Library because Stanford, for those who don't know, is the first stop on the express and last stop on the local to Grand Central, which is 1 block from the New York Public Library. So I ended up working on Italian American anti-fascists. I kept it simple, obviously, to 2 people. This guy, Gaetano Salvemini, who is the kind of leading light behind this group of people called the Fuoriusciti, who are these anti-fascist exiles from the 1920s and 1930s in Italy who couldn't get jobs in the regime or were chased out by black shirts. And then this figure who I would argue is probably the most important Italian American, a guy named Carlo Tresca, though completely erased from our cultural memory, who in the 19-teens was a major figure in union organizing for Italian Americans in things like the Paterson Silk Strike, the Masabi Iron Range Strike, the second wave of the Bread and Roses Strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and looking at these 2 kind of figures who really gave their life to making people's lives better, right, in terms of their involvement in socialist politics and the labor movement, and then once fascism emerged, to fight this really awful ideology. And one of the things I came out of that project discovering is how conscious they were and worried about the notion of Italian American or Italian equals fascism, and how much, though, despite they saw their fight as as class struggles, right, especially Tresca, it also very much became a cultural struggle, right, of kind of decoupling the Italian and Italian American identity from fascism, because obviously the elites in Italy supported fascism, but the Italian American elites in the U.S. also supported fascism, right? And there's a struggle at that time period between fascist and anti-fascist, whether or not Italian/Italian American, though that hyphenated identity doesn't really exist yet, right? But Italians in America equals fascism, right? Because that is something that the regime really wants to do, right? By regime, I mean the fascist regime, really wants to equate Italian default equals fascist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I want to get more into that soon, especially in the contemporary sense. But before we jump ahead, let's what does being Italian American mean to you?
Yeah. Before we go, can I just describe fascism really quick?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's many definitions you can find online. Robert Paxton, whatever. And to me, it ultimately comes down to a question of ethics and values. Fascism is the politics of domination. It is a political system built around dominating other people, right? And you have to ask yourself a question. Do I want to live in a world where there's going to be people who are dominated and dominators on top of them, right? And not just in the sense of class. It's cultural domination. It's social domination. It's gender domination, right? And of course, class domination is a component of that as well, right? But it's domination across the entire spectrum. National domination, one nation dominates the other. And it's really, when you say I'm a fascist and I support fascism, ultimately what you support is one group of people, whoever that may be, right? Because it's always historically contingent, dominating another group of people. And that's where your politics stand, right? And to me, it's an ethical question. I'm against that, right? Mm-hmm. Against that completely, as were Tresca and Salvemini. Now, the question... Yeah, right. I think it's important to establish that, right? Because if I just say fascism and don't define really what it means, it just seems kind of abstract and out there. It's, we know this guy talking, he has no clue, whatever. Right? I think it's important to really capture the essence of it. Right.
No, and I think that's a fantastic kind of summary if you had to just put it in like a, like just a very sentence, like what is it? Like that's what it is. Because, Dr. Gabriel Rockhill, are you familiar with any of his work? He's a really, really interesting scholar. I think he's at Cornell, but he's done some really interesting work in the space. And when he talks about fascism, and I think this also fits the kind of just button definition you gave it too, where he says how it's not like it's just one specific thing where you can point and go, that's the fascism, but it's there's different pillars about it. Like there's the sort of business oriented fascism, and then there's the more abrupt, brutal social type of fascism. And I think to play on what you said too, it all comes back to some kind of dominance. economic dominance, social dominance, and then just in the most authoritarian sense, dominance.
Yeah. And there's the gender component is important. The race component is important. It's not just one. It's right. So like under like traditionalist, like conservative capitalism, it's very much about class domination, right? So these are like your John D. Rockefellers, right? Where fascism is across the spectrum, right? Like Rockefeller wasn't really telling you what you should have and do in your bedroom or not, right? I'm pretty sure there's things he was against, whatever, but it was mainly about this kind of relationship of boss versus worker, right? You have the domination of the church. You're Catholic or you're not. Right, and the people who are not in a Catholic society are going to be second-class citizens. Right, really, the thing with fascism is totalitizing. Right, a system, a state-led system of domination across all aspects of human, right, all aspects of humanity, gender, identity, sexuality, again, class, culture, right, it's part of it. Well, race, state, everything. Not. I went way off there. To get to your question, what does being Italian American mean to me? I'm really not. I don't know. It changes on different moments. I mean, it's an identity that I could easily escape. I could choose to just assimilate and be just another white guy. That's something I haven't chose to do. I think it's important. Maybe it's because I'm sentimental. To me, it's my story. It's my history, and I really that's it. It's my story, and not just my story. It's a story that 17 or so million other Americans share to various degrees. Maybe it's our story. Yeah, it's our story, my story, a collective story. It's not one single thing. It's different. It means different things, to different people. And one person's version of what it means to be Italian American could mean something completely different. Right, and I can use an example. So for me, my Italian American story is the kind of more a stereotypical one. My family came here from Southern Italy. All my family's from Southern Italy. They wanted to have economic mobility. Some of them wanted to go back. Right, 51% or so went back between 1880 and 1924. Right, my grandmother was born here but raised in Italy on my mother's side. And that's that more typical story is seen in my family's history. And then there's also like people like in Tontitown, Arkansas, whose family came over as basically indentured servants in the late 1800s, and they're from like the Veneto and like Friuli, and like their food and like even their experience in the U.S. This is majority agricultural, like growing grapes and that kind of stuff. Is their Italian American experience is completely different from mine. But the thing that I guess you can say that links us all is that at some point in history, our we ourselves or our people we descend from left this peninsula and its peripheries, right? Sicily, the various other islands. There's even Italians in what's now Croatia, right? They're part of our history as well. There's Istrians, etc. People who left this Italic region and came to the U.S. And it means different things, different people.
Mm-hmm. So, getting more into the contemporary moment that we touched on, there seems to be, like I'm actually a paid member of NIAF. Like I am a paid member of that organization, and they seem to have I think it's fair to say a pretty significant right-wing bias in a lot of the stuff they put out. And then if you just look at their Instagram, you'll see pro-Trump stuff. And a lot of the time, then you look at the comment section and it's like, well, this clearly does not reflect your organization. Like this clearly, like there's people that are like, hey, I'm a member and what? And so I guess my question is, I think that a kind of generalization is that Italian American kind of loans itself to a more conservative point of view. How did that come to be? I mean, I honestly don't even know.
So this is great. Now this is like, it's less of an abstract thing. So I'm like, I'm confused and more of a historically grounded. I love this. This is a good question. NIAF framing is important. NIAF is the most like left of the major organizations, right? So there's National Italian American Foundation, NIAF, these Order Sons and Daughters of Italian Italy in America, which is they're the biggest one. There's Unico, which just means unique, Unico. And then there's this kind of regional organization led by the Russo brothers' dad, ISDA, Italian Sons and Daughters in America. And then there's a couple of other smaller regional organizations. There's one down in like Louisiana, Mississippi area. But the big four, and the biggest one of them all is the Order Sons. But NIAF probably has the most kind of economic, cultural, and political capital. They have a place in the UN. And this is an interesting history because their current chairman is a Democratic operative. He worked for Eliot Engel, right? Who was a kind of centrist Democrat. So it's not like they're like reactionary to the boot, right? Reactionary to the core, like some of these other organizations, right? The one I mentioned in like the Louisiana area is literally led by a Confederacy apologist. NIAF was founded by like civil rights oriented people. This guy General Barone, who viewed Italians in America as part of this kind of like multicultural fabric. And you should really, for the audience, I implore looking up this guy General Barone. He is part of the civil rights movement. He's very much interested in interethnic and inter and intra ethnic cooperation. A true kind of a pluralist. And as you've noted, a lot of the kind of content they produce is right wing, right? And what does this indicate? It indicates that Italians and organizations aren't static, right? The NIAF of 2025 probably really is not the same NIAF of 1980, when a lot of those earlier, more liberal-minded people were around, and everything is based on history, historical conditions, and all that kind of stuff. Facilitate changes in attitudes and mores. Right, Americans are much more solidaric in 1950 than they are in 2000, for instance. Right, coming out of Popular Front culture, and this applies to Italian Americans as well. I'm doing research on this right now. That this particular question that I'm not ready to share quite yet, but I can share what has been published by other people so far.
Okay.
Right? Because I want to make an argument.
And just so all the listeners know, I was not aware of this information ahead of time. Yeah. This was just a question that...
Yeah. I would like to argue that what I would argue is the seeds of reaction are already kind of there by the early 1900s. Right? Okay. But I need to develop that more. Right? Okay. What a lot of the historical consensus argues, and this is looking at people like Matthew Fry Jacobson, Roots 2. It's a book called Roots 2. There's this guy, Richard Moss, who has this book about white ethnic revival in the 1970s. It's called like the politics of nostalgia. There's another guy, Jonathan Ryder, who wrote a book in the 80s, Jews and Italians Against Liberalism. And the kind of the consensus since at least the 1980s was that the civil rights movement comes around, right? And it leads to a lot of resentment amongst white ethnics. And there's a lot of research in this period. People who study white ethnics look at this period, right? And I'm going to get back to Moss and another person, Carnevale, right? Make sure, say, if I forget to mention them, please hold me, right? Okay. And basically, the civil rights movement comes around. The Democratic Party is no longer emphasizing working class whites and interested in the priorities of African Americans and other non-white peoples, and this leads to this kind of mass delusionment with liberalism, where white ethnics, right, and Italians are one of the biggest white ethnic groups in this country, feel betrayed and abandoned by the Democratic Party. And slowly, as time goes on, they eventually become like Republicans especially under Ronald Reagan, right? Between Nixon and Reagan, somewhere there, we see a major party shift amongst the kind of working class white ethnic Italian Americans. Now back to Moss and Carnevale. Carnevale writes about 1960s New York, New Jersey, and Moss writes about 1970s New York City. And throughout this time period is actually contestations within the Italian American community as we're going to go in what direction are we going to go into, right? Carnevale looks at this debate between this guy whose name I'm going to completely butcher is Abudato versus this other guy, Anthony Imperale. Abudato is an ally of that guy, General Barone, who I mentioned earlier, this kind of pluralist, right? And what he's trying to do is create this kind of multi-ethnic, multiracial coalition in Newark, right? And on the other end is this guy, Anthony Imperiale, who's in New York as well, who's doubling down on like white racist resentment, right? And what she argues is it's just a
So
struggle.
he was Imperale the imperialist.
And
So,
Anthony Imperiale is his name.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, internal imperialist maybe. And what that shows is that like there was a very self-conscious struggle emerging within the community as the New Deal coalition, which is this coalition built by FDR that brings together the working class across all racial spectrums, right? Because African Americans, for instance, were voting Republican in large numbers until the New Deal, right? The Party of Lincoln, etc., right? And the New Deal builds this working class, multi-ethnic, multiracial coalition, right? That uneasily exists throughout the 1930s until the early 1970s, and that we can point to moments, at least in what has been studied, right? There could be 500 other case studies of this in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in St. Louis, Missouri. This is just what I've seen so far. And that there's a struggle that goes on within the community of how's it going to define itself, right? And then in the case of Moss, he looks at two organizations. One is CHOW, Congress of Italian American Organizations, which is led by Mary Sansone, who grew up in an IWW family. For those who don't know, International Workers of the World was a syndicalist organization that person Carlo Tresca I mentioned organized with. And what's his face? Joe Colombo, the leader of the Italian American Civil Rights Organization, right? Who and basically he frames it as like a politics of like white ethnic grievance, which is coming from the Civil Rights Organization, the IACRL, right? White ethnic grievance and that kind of stuff. And then Mary Sansone, who is interested in this kind of pluralist working class coalition within South Brooklyn, and they're battling each other in New York City, similar to the battle that's taking place in Newark. Right, and as we've seen as time goes on, those who are on the more reactionary side won this kind of cultural struggle. I'm of the mind that the organizations, the Sons of Italy, the Unicos, and the ISDAs were always prone to be more reactionary because, right, this is this argument that I think is a little bit further. Not so much the kind of the masses, right, to use a very kind of loaded term, your rank and file dock workers, but that the kind of professional organizations were always kind of middle class or petty bourgeois, and always had like an anti-socialist, in the 1930s kind of pro-fascist, for the most part, outlook in the kind of respectability politics. We're not radicals, we're respectable Americans who want to assimilate, right? Which is why I'm making the argument that the kind of the seeds for this kind of reactionary aesthetic, at minimally aesthetic, right? And then now, obviously, contemporarily with MAGA practice of kind of white ethnics and white chauvinism, have been here for a very long time. But it's really the 1970s when you see a big bulk of Italian Americans begin to shift to the right in their sentiments. And that's not even saying that people who are leading these battles were necessarily viewing themselves as right wing, right? So in New York, there's this guy who runs the mayor who's aligned with the ISCRL, Prociano, I can't pronounce. One is Procano or Prociano, one of those names, who's a Democrat, but he's like a law and order Democrat, right? He doesn't view himself as like a conservative or like a Republican. So there's even within like the nominal kind of left coalition that people are beginning to broke with. From my understanding, is Joe Colombo viewed himself as like a New Dealer, right? Despite the fact that the kind of practice of the IACRL was reactive politics, right? Reacting against the gains of the civil rights movement, right? So it's not like people are sitting in a smoke-filled room being like, I'm going to pull Italian Americans to the right? It's just these historical developments that take place, right? That and people reacting to these historical developments that leads to the kind of creating of a more reactionary type of politic. And then I would say there was a NIAF poll in 2012 that said basically, and this is unlimited scientific data, that Italian Americans were kind of split, 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican, 1/3 independent. Though recent data, there's a Fairline Dickerson poll of Italian Americans in New Jersey, and they were about 58%. 58% went for Trump. So it's really, it's not like overnight everyone woke up and it was reactionary. Is that there's been this kind of slow historical development towards that direction. And I would say it also correlates with the rise of non-white people coming into the country in larger numbers, right? Because 1965 or four, one of those years, there's a shifting of our immigration laws that opens up the country to non-white people in large numbers. And then and also with the kind of creation of greater material wealth and leaving the cities, right? Entering white suburbs, right? And I would argue taking on, even though they view themselves as hyphenated ethnics, right? Taking on kind of like a whiteness mentality, the white picket fence, social conservatism, massive amounts of social conformity, right? Which weren't the case when they were living in arguably ethnic ghettos like East Harlem, Bridgeport's North End, New Haven's, Worcester Square, Baltimore's Little Italy. That type of there wasn't the kind of space for that type of politics like there is now for the community as they've simultaneously assimilated and as others have taken up more of a presence in the U.S. In all spaces across the U.S., which is ironic because that's kind of our history. We were those others that came in, and then were pushed back against and subject to nativist rhetoric. That's a long-winded answer.
No, but that's an excellent answer. Thank you for that. So let's bring it up to the now then. So to give a little context here, I learned about you through the Italians for Zoran Instagram, which for anyone who might not know, that was a pro Zoran Mondani Instagram account trying to get him elected mayor and succeeding, by the way. Congratulations. But trying to support him for mayor. And it had an Italian theme and many, I'm assuming many Italian Americans behind it. And your work was featured. I loved what you guys did in October, which that's going to be another question. But in October, every day you highlighted a different Italian American in history that did valuable leftist or leftist adjacent work, and it was really cool. I learned a lot, to be honest with you. Some of it I knew, some of it I didn't. But yeah, it was awesome. So having blabbered all that, how do you feel like maybe things are shifting now? And could you share a little bit about the experience of the Mamdani event that we were talking about off mic, where there was a little bit of clashing between different Italian American groups?
Yeah. So Italians for Zoran was founded by Jesse Ortiz, who's from the Italian section of Williamsburg. His mother's Italian, multi-generational New Yorker, very much identifies as an Italian American. And there's places you can find him talking about the origins and how he just like came up with this hashtag and how it kind of steamrolled into something. So I actually knew Jesse from like the pre-COVID days when we were doing like leftist stuff in around this place called Mayday Space in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which at one time was the largest Sicilian neighborhood in America, interestingly enough. And it's in the heart of the kind of Sicilian section, what was once the Sicilian section, and still the kind of census block that has the most Italians, this kind of historical irony. So I reached out to the Instagram page when I saw it, and I was just like, oh, this is so cool, whatever. And he's like, oh, it's me, Jesse. And I was like, oh, I haven't seen you since like before the COVID days. And I really have not, because of COVID and then immediately following the PhD, I really haven't been on the ground like I was when I was younger and not in a graduate program. So I was just like, listen, I'm here to help however I can. And really this kind of irony of how the group developed. They were doing canvassing, but it was just kind of like, oh, Italians for Zoran is sponsoring canvassing. It's important work. And to me, I'm particularly not, I mean, don't get me wrong, I support Zoran. I'm not particularly the most gun-ho about electoral politics.
Sure.
But I was like, Zoran's going to provide the space for, people who want to do serious organizing on the ground, right? It's good not to have a hostile figure in City Hall, and freezing the rent is really important. I live in a rent-stabilized unit, so that would tremendously improve my life.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there's room for nuance in the world. I mean, yeah. It's one of those things. Like, is electoralism going to solve our problems alone? Absolutely not. But It's okay to be happy that he won. Come on. It was okay to be happy and feel good that night. It was definitely okay.
100%. Yeah. And I canvassed once. And it's because my girlfriend was like, "You're going to canvass." And I was like, "That's fine." But I was like, he's interesting because there's Irish for Zoran, there's Jews for Zoran, right? And building, it's like, oh my God, it's 1940 over here, right? We're building this kind of popular front coalition around progressive politics, right? Though FDR was by no means a socialist. And I would even argue that Zoran's platform is not even socialistic. It's social democratic.
And, he's a social
Keynesian,
democrat.
It's Keynesian, right? And that's much better than like Eric Adams' neoliberalism.
Just a little bit.
I was just like, whatever you need, let me know. Like, I have a lot of history and a lot of information that I could share. Are you looking? I'm sorry. Oh, yes. I have a lot of information I can share, and I'm happy to intellectually support this project. So, what really got it going is this kind of great irony. Is in it wasn't like, oh, let's build something on the ground, right? It was just like, yeah, like we're Italian Americans, we support Zoran. They did some canvassing. And in the summer, there's surfaces this old tweet, because it was still Twitter then, of Zoran giving the kind of colonizer-in-chief Christopher Columbus the middle finger. I believe that Zoran's dad is a really great, actually I had to read him for my comps, great intellectual about colonialism and anti-colonialism. So obviously, Zoran understands colonization and colonialism and its impacts and all that kind of stuff. He grew up in a family where I'd imagine that was talked about. So he gives this picture of him giving a finger to Columbus, right? In this era when the most Columbus monuments came down, right? Tons of Columbus monuments came down in that kind of George Floyd summer, right? New Haven, Connecticut came down, actually led by Italian Americans, Frank Carano, and amongst other, who's a union guy himself, really great, thoughtful guy. So it starts with this kind of middle finger to Zoran, and a group is upset about it. And they're called the Italian American Civil Rights League. They're not the same one from the 70s, right? There's one from the 1970s that's founded by Joseph Colombo, the leader of the Colombo crime family, right? Which is kind of like a charity organization and also like an outrage organization, right? So they do things like help people figure out their loans, right? But they're not building like the structures, right? They're not building structures. So it's like, okay, we're going to help give charity to this person. We're going to give charity to that person. And mainly drumming up outrage around like Italian-American representation in media, right? So one of the things is they oppose this Alka-Seltzer commercial. Another thing is they make sure that the word mafia is not mentioned in The Godfather, right? And so it's kind of like this kind of charity/outrage organization. It does emerge organically out of the Italian-American Defamation League, which is a thing in the 1960s, right? And it's at a time of what Patrick Gallo, who's a great kind of social scientist, calls Italian-American ethnic alienation, right? So it's a product of a historical moment, and a historical moment where it makes a lot of sense. In between Trump 1 and Trump 2, when Biden was president, Roger Stone, Paul Disgracia and Gracia, there's this guy, Mike Crispy, out in New Jersey, this other guy, Sal, who's a disgraced NYPD officer, Sal Greco, right? A kind of real hodgepodge of people who number one weren't involved in the Italian American community.
It's just a who's who of Batman villains.
Well, it's like all the guys who have vowels in their last name that happen to be MAGA, right? Mm-hmm. I'm being serious, and really it's really this guy Mike Crispy from New Jersey who lost like an election by 30 points and is now like an OAN or Newsmax, one of those companies anchor, and this guy Paul Ingracia who recently had that I have a Nazi streak in me, and then I found out today. He's one of the guys. The leak, the young Republicans leak. He's 30.
Oh,
so young.
Okay.
15 is not too young for women, but 30 is a kid for men. But these are kind of what we'd call like MAGA-roni, right? These kind of MAGA Italian Americans create this group, the Italian American Civil Rights League, and what they want to do is drum a lot of outrage against Zoran for giving the middle finger to the Columbus monument, right? And the thing is, the league itself presents itself as neutral. Right, though much of the upper echelons, right? I won't say all because we shouldn't speak in absolutes. Only says much of the upper echelons is fasci, right? It's Stone, Ingracia, Crispy, Sal Perconi or Perniconi, one of those names like that. Sal Greco. The upper echelons really MAGA people, right? But the league itself, it kind of covers itself in like neutral language, despite the fact they only endorse Republicans, right? And they drum up this outrage against the middle finger to the Columbus Monument in Astoria that Zoran gave. So what they do is they want to do an anti kind of Zoran rally outside of his office, and they decide to ally with Zionists, right? These kind of like super right wing Jewish New Yorkers, and you have to watch the videos. You see them and it's bonkers. Like they're like going crazy, like testosterone flying all over the place. There's this great video of this guy walking up to someone on our side with the Sicilian flag, telling him that the Trinarchia is a Nazi symbol. That just gives you an idea of what you're dealing with. But we felt compelled to do something. And it was like, we can't let these people control the narratives that a bunch of like mouth breathing, like reactionary Italian Americans are going to set the tone about what the relationship Zoran has with Italian Americans. So we do a counter protest, and basically we got about 30 people. That about 50. We had a little bit more than us. We had about 30 people, and it leads to this kind of like a battle of chants. The chair of the Civil Rights League is this kind of like mafia lawyer named Gerard Marone, who's a New Yorker, and he gives like a speech basically saying all the cliches, oh, we built this country, all this stuff that people that don't know what they don't know think they know type of rhetoric. Oh, Italians are the best. That this kind of really, I'm too lazy to read a history book style take of Italian American history. And then on our side, we tried to ground our protest in humor and in history. Right, so things like your mom uses jarred sauce, right? These kind of humorous stuff, but also having like anti-fascist flags, singing like anti-fascist chants. We had like this little like what's it called? What do they call those things? Like not like a handout, but like a little guide to
a leaflet,
like a little leaflet, but it's on the Instagram explaining who they were, right, and how this was. And again, I'm not going to say everyone in the organization is MAGA. I'm not going to say it's a completely fascist organization, but the upper echelons, these people who are really the kind of the juice behind it, Crispy, etc., really are kind of nativist, anti-immigrant, again, not involved with the Italian American community, but they made this organization to make Italian Americans more reactionary. So we had this battle of this verbal battle between us and them. And I really, really implore the audience to look at the videos to really get a sense of what it was like, because they were kind of goading us. They were like, oh, coming up to us, yelling at us. And we tried our best. I think we succeeded in being kind of disciplined, saying chants like MAGA is Mussolini and things like that. And really framing them as a kind of nativist MAGA organization and not reflective of Italian Americans. And the press coverage was amazing. The New York Times covered it really well, right? In 50, 60 years from now, people are going to look at that and be like, oh, like Italian Americans were debating this. Status Quo came there. And interesting, even enough, the Post-Millennial, which is a far-right outlet, gave a really good coverage of it.
That's refreshing to hear.
Yeah, I know. I was like, this is actually really good. It was better than the local Queens coverage.
Wow.
Because you really see the kind of difference between the two sides, where we're disciplined, based in actual history and opposing nativism and nonsense. And and on their side, it was just like the hodgepodge of everything you can imagine from the far right. There was like provocateurs, people talking shit, saying racial slurs. Crackhead Barney, who's a local kind of performance artist who goes around and interviews people. She came and she was just like dressed up as like painted herself like all white, and these guys were just losing their minds over it and calling her like a monkey and stuff. It was really interesting, and it's really the two kind of sides. And there was a big generational divide. We were mostly under 40 with a couple of people in the middle age range and a couple of boomers. A handful, maybe about 3 or 4 people that were in the baby boomer generation, about another 3 or 4 in Gen X, overwhelmingly millennial, and a few Gen Z. Their side is kind of the inverse. It was like predominantly boomer and Gen X with a little bit of millennials and Gen Z, right? So you see this kind of big generational divide. Like I literally took work off. I was like, we have to go to this. I took work off to go to. A lot of us took work off because we felt, right, we had a group chat, we were talking, and we felt it was important not to have the reactionaries control the narrative about Italian Americans. And interestingly enough, in September, you begin to see the Italian American organizations take up this Columbia, Zoran is anti-Italian kind of nonsense, but that doesn't pick up to anything. It was in June when it manifested in something physical. And it's a big issue to link Columbus to Italians. It's just not the case, but these groups, these organizations want to do it, and it's a struggle. It's a real struggle.
Well, when you encounter, and I'm not talking about the Roger Stones of the world, I'm talking about like a well-intentioned person who means well and just had bad information. Like when you encounter somebody who says those cliches around, Columbus Day specifically, how do you respond to that?
So this is my life's goal. If Columbus was decoupled from Italian Americans and I died the next day, I would die happy. I'm being serious. This is a project. If you look me up, you can find lectures and writings where I discussed this. There was a project by the Italian American elite to link Italian Americans to Columbus that begins in the 1800s, right, and really picks up in the 19-teens and 1930s, right? It's a question of values, and from what I know, right, there are liberal people who will say things like, "Oh, we don't, Columbus was bad, but he was given to us because of the lynchings." Have you heard this before? The lynching. NIAF is.
No, if I've heard that. Well, I've heard the thing that the largest lynching in the United States was of Italian. I mean, I've heard that. I've never heard that connected to Columbus.
Yeah, that's been a myth that's been perpetuated the past 10 years or so.
Okay.
But so you'll find people who are like, I can see how Columbus is problematic, but we were given him because of the lynchings, and therefore I understand why we should keep him. And then immediately I'll go to how the lynchings have nothing to do with Columbus. This is something that was literally made up like 10 years ago because Benjamin Harris declared Columbus Day a year and a half after the lynchings, and therefore it must make sense that Columbus Day was declared in response to the lynchings. The lynchings in March 1891. There's October 1891, no Columbus Day. And then all of a sudden, in October 1892, we have the Day of Discovery. Oh, and that was actually about the lynchings, not the case. It's really a question of politics. Liberal-minded people, for the most part, leftists just like fuck Columbus, and that's always been the case. You can find anarchist periodicals in the 1890s saying Columbus is awful. You'll find socialist Italian-American press saying Columbus is awful in the 1930s, right? There's a kind of a consensus amongst the left. Amongst more kind of PMC liberal people is if you talk to them about it, they'll change their mind. But because they're liberals, they lack the courage to do anything about it in the organization. But yeah, I know there as a fact, there's people that are pretty high up within the organizations who are liberal and are okay with not having Columbus as a symbol, but will never say anything publicly about it. On the other hand, the right, forget about it, because it's the point. It's a figure of colonialism and exceptionalism and European domination, and that's the point, right? And they're going to hold on to that figure because they say, I want to belong to those things as well. And I haven't been able to convince anyone on the right who identifies as conservative to move away from Columbus's figure. And I'll give a great example. I got into a little spat with a really thoughtful, smart academic who's conservative, right? Like a really hardcore, like Catholic, but like does smart programming, smart work, is not stupid. And he was literally wouldn't budge. He was just like, well, Columbus brought Christianity to America, and that's a default good, and therefore it's worth being celebrated, right? And you run into a lot of takes like this. Well, he made the most important event in all of history, and therefore we shouldn't get rid of him, right? You'll have like these kind of weird justifications. But I would say that's been like the two responses I had is more liberal people will be like, yeah, like I'm okay getting rid of him, but I'm not going to lead the charge for that. And then you'll have like conservative people who create all of these kind of ideological loops to defend it. And then you just have like the fascist people who don't care, which is a component as well. Like those MAGA Italians, they don't care. Like some of them are saying he's a saint. This is the wow. Level. Yeah. You look up Saint Christopher Columbus and see where it leads you to. You'll literally see them people making an argument he was a saint. To me, it ultimately comes down to like the embracement of Columbus is the domination is the point. So,
well, is that even? I mean, is there even like nuggets of truth in that he brought Christianity to quote America?
Yeah, but that's taking the default position that Christianity is the only truth, and therefore everything. It's a teleology, right? It's the same kind of logic the Soviets would use when they were doing their like death camps and shit too, right? The Nazis were using when they were doing the death camps. All of this is worth it because it's bringing something at the end. It actually comes from Christianity. right? If you think like this kind of notion of a beginning and end of history, right? The end of history is everyone becoming Christian, everyone becoming Aryans, or everyone becoming communist, right? There's a beginning and the end, and everything in between is worth it to get to that end. And for a lot of again, not all Christians, right? Because there's multiple traditions, but for a lot of right-wing Christians, right? We need to be specific, right? It's a right-wing thing. It was totally worth it because it brought the Christianization and civilization to the continent. Yeah, that's true. But it also genocided the Taino people, right? That's like a fact. Like between when he landed there and by the 1550s, they were gone. Like he initiated that. Like was he out there and single-filely like executing every Taino? No. But was Hitler out there single-filely executing every Jew? No. But he put into place a system that allowed that to happen, right? And it's like Columbus emerges in 1491, and that's it. And there's a history, right? There's the Reconquista, right, which was the reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula for Christian kings, which required the genocide of the Islamic population in Spain, right? And then you ask yourself, like, where does this ideology come from? Well, he's living in Iberia most of his life, and he's seeing this project taken out by the Spanish to remove the Jews and Muslims from the peninsula. Secondly, where does the slavery come from? He worked for the Portuguese for a long time, and what were the Portuguese doing in the Atlantic coast of Africa? Is they were doing the slave trade and creating these kind of colonies in like Cape Verde and Spanish and Madeira and Canary Islands. He was all over those places, and he sees these kind of systems of erasure and the enslavement of human beings through his biography, right, through his life and work. And it was only natural to him that they come to an area and repeat those same things. And it's like everyone wants to ignore that. But you understand he made this great discovery. And it's true. It's probably the most important event in human history. But the guy who did it was a piece of shit.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it makes sense too that was just what he knew and what he would plan to do in any type of situation like that. Because it's just like, and correct me if this is kind of hearsay, but I'm pretty sure that this did like he also was exposed to the cocoa bean and determined it was just useless. So like he could have helped bring chocolate about, but instead chose really terrible things instead.
I mean, his whole thing is looking for gold. It was gold, extracting gold. It was a money venture. It's undeniable that it's a money venture. I can't speak for the specifics of the cocoa bean and his relationship to it. But I mean, it's not specific. It's not that everyone had these worldviews. Right, because in places like Bologna and Italy, right, we can look to our own Italian tradition. Slavery was legal since like 1200s, right? In the Republic of Ragusa, which is an Italian-speaking republic in what's now Dubrovnik, slavery was illegal. In Sweden, slavery was illegal, right? It was just the person who happened to be who happened to lead this voyage, right? Happened to for a career partake in the kind of trading of human beings, right? It's not that. It's something that's unique to him. It's not something that everyone did, right? It's the historical specificity of the biographical figure of Columbus, right? And maybe the only reason he had the courage, and it's true, it's courageous to make that adventure, was because he was doing all this crazy shit off the coast of Africa, right? But yeah, he didn't magically appear in 1491 and discovered America and is just this great hero. I mean, do you want to get more specifics in how Italian Americans become connected with him, or?
Sure.
Because I feel like I'm taking up a lot of space.
You are the person being interviewed. Yes. But yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, please embellish a little more.
Yeah. So the figure of Columbus and his time, though viewed as a kind of landmark event, he dies poor in obscurity, mainly because of his treatment of not indigenous peoples, but of Spanish colonists, right? And it's kind of brutal governorship, right? And again, you ask the question, why was it brutal? It's because that was the systems that he was being exposed to in his years of working as a merchant for the Portuguese on the Atlantic coast, right? It explains it. Doesn't apologize it, right? Doesn't justify it. It explains it. Why did he have this worldview? He goes to Spain, stripped of his titles, and he basically writes this hagiography about himself, the Book of Prophecies, where it basically says, oh, my mission was really about Christianity, or it was about fucking gold, right, in finding India. My mission was really about Christianity and getting money for a crusade. You were a merchant, bro. Don't lie, right? It was about that. He dies. Then his son does this kind of another kind of retcon of him. My dad wasn't bad. He writes the Book of Columbus by Ferdinand Columbus. Throughout the 15 and 1600s, viewed as a kind of tragic figure. Then the 1700s come around. We got a bunch of boys over here in America that are like, we're not European, we're American. And they decide this is mainly white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, predominantly British. And in 1792, when what becomes Tammany Hall, the Columbian Order, is established, and they celebrate the first Columbus Day in 1792. It's white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that do this. And a little bit further along, you have the white Creole elite of Latin American countries, people like Simon Bolivar, also want to do this. We're not European, but we're also not indigenous. So who's not European and not indigenous is Columbus, right? And Latin American elites, just like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans, latch onto this kind of figure of Columbus, right? And it's really in the kind of turn of the 1700s into the 1800s that the kind of retcon of Columbus as an admirable, worthwhile figure emerges. Washington Irving writes a biography of him early on in the era of good feelings, or 1820, somewhere along there. Spain begins to retcon him as their empire collapses. We were empire once, and therefore Columbus is a great figure in their empire. After Italian unification, there's this really small, mostly unsuccessful push to make Columbus a kind of pan-Italian figure. Simultaneously, while that's happening, the Irish Americans are embracing him as a Catholic American figure, right? Interestingly enough, never landed in America, right? But there's this push to have a kind of mythology, and a mythology that's neither indigenous American nor fully European, right? And that's the kind of context of the U.S. And by the 1860s, 1870s, primarily northern Italians begin to embrace Columbus as a figure, right? And this is true in Italy as well, right? All the Columbus monuments in Italy are Rome and north of Rome. There's zero in southern Italy, right? And as the 1880s and 1890s begin to unfold, these northern Italians are the kind of economic leadership of Italians in the U.S. This is just how it unfolded, right? And this is at a time of deep, deep, deep racial bias towards Italian Americans. And by that, I don't mean Italian Americans weren't white, always legally white. But race means like kind of what we consider ethnicity today, right? And in the U.S., like the white race, right, white people were at the very top, like Anglo-Germanic, Nordic people, and at the bottom, like Latins, Semites, and Slavs, with like French people in the middle, right? So there's this kind of racial hierarchy, and these northern Italians, right, who now have capital, want to be considered a socially acceptable group. And who's a figure from the sunny peninsula of Italy, as you mentioned, that this white Anglo-Saxon elite viewed as legitimate, none other than St. Chris himself, right? And this is also simultaneously happening as the American government is completing its conquest of the West and its domination of the American Indian, right? So all of this stuff is going on at the same time, and then also the age of European global imperialism, right? So we have this notion of colonization and removal of indigenous peoples and destruction of indigenous people being a social good, right? And then Italians in this kind of racially hierarchical system, but lower, right? So we have a figure who we can latch onto and say, look, we're a part of this colonizing mission from the very beginning, and we're also a figure that's white who's acceptable, right? And they're not saying this exactly, but they'll use things like, you look at the language, they'll use things like civilization, they'll use things like discoverer, use things like European, right? They're not like in a smoke-filled room plotting this either. It kind of emerges organically. There is a point where it is a smoke-filled room. I'll get to that, right? It kind of emerges organically from the elite, primarily northern Italian immigrants living in the U.S. in the 19th century. As I said, nothing to do with the lynchings, right? There's a day of discovery that Benjamin Harrison proclaims. It's in 1892. All of America was celebrating Columbus in 1892, right? There's a lynching that takes place in 1891. And there's this myth they're connected, not connected at all. You can read the proclamation, doesn't mention lynchings once, not once. And why would he announce it a year and a half, almost 2 years later, and not at the October immediately following the lynchings when the international tensions were its highest? It's a stupid argument pushed by people who don't know what they don't know, right? That's how little they know. Then the real kind of nationalization of Columbus takes place in the 1930s. This is partially pushed by Benito Mussolini. So we have like the Columbus Monument in Syracuse, the one in Chicago were literally funded by fascists, like the regime itself. The one in Astoria that Zoran gave the middle finger to was founded by this is Italian-American business organization, the Italian Chamber of Commerce, which itself in the 1930s was allied with fascists. So I'm pretty sure a lot of fascists were behind that going up as well. And then there's this really, right, a lot of the statues are erected in the 30s, right? Erected in there's the late 1800s, the 1930s, and then like in the 1950s and 60s, right? And then again in the 90s. But the 30s, this is the deliberate effort by the fascist state to link Italians to Columbus, because Mussolini himself has these colonial projects, and he wants to argue that there's this long-term history of Italian colonialism going back to Christopher Columbus, and he really pushes for Italian Americans to embrace Columbus. And it's really in the 30s when it becomes a kind of pan Italian American symbol, right? And there's tons of localized Columbus celebrations before them, right? But the notion of it being this pan-Italian symbol is in the 1930s, right? Fun fact, in 1912, when the Italian workers in Lawrence, Massachusetts were on strike, right? And that guy Carlos Tresca I mentioned is part of that strike. Anglos held a Columbus Day parade in Lawrence, Massachusetts, specifically as an anti-immigrant holiday, right? So it gives you an idea that association is not there in the 19-teens, right? It's amazing fact. Is he was used as a bludgeon against Italian immigrants who were striking, and how the strikers were anti-American, and really in the 1930s, right? Specifically because of the fascist regime and Mussolini's fascist allies in America, people like Generoso Pope, who is the editor of the largest Italian-American newspaper at that time, Il Progresso Italo-Americano, anything but Progresso, right? That really push this connection between the two groups. Fun fact, Pope's family then goes on to found the New York Post. Right, you want to talk about someone who's done more damage to the Italian American psyche? Generoso Pope is if I have a hole of shame, he's in the top 5 positions. This guy, the damage that he's done, the linking of Italians to Columbus, the creation of the Columbus Day Parade down here, the support for the Ethiopian War, and the poison gas warfare, like really not a great guy. His potential implications in the assassination of Carlo Tresca, because Carlo Tresca was calling this guy out like no tomorrow in front of his face. It was that moment. It becomes a much more deliberate kind of pan project. And throughout all this time period, people were opposing it, right? And as you saw in the post, I had that Girolamo Valenti quote where he argues Columbus Day is a fascist holiday, and a bunch of Italian Americans come to oppose the leaf laying ceremony on Columbus Day in the 1930s, 35 or 36, one of those years.
Yeah. Oh, wow. No, dude, that's incredible. I did not know all those connections. That is remarkable. Is that well, what's your? I mean, if you can't tell me, it's okay. But what's your dissertation going to be about? Is that sort of? So
my master's thesis is literally what I just told you.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. That's so cool. Okay.
Yeah. So my master's thesis, which was written really in rush, so there's going to be a lot of typos, but you can find it online. It's really that. That's
so cool.
Yeah, it's this kind of story in this project. And at that time period, I think I might have even included the lynching argument, because me and one of my coworkers have really been looking into this the past 2 years. And then we're reaching the conclusion that's completely fake. And it seems to be the case. That's the connection between the two is fake. And I think of Harrison may have, I think we're in line like that. So that's inaccurate. But it gives you an idea that so many people internalize this. Where does this come from? And there's historians who are serious Italian American studies scholar that were even saying that, because it was being propagated so much. They were like, it makes, no one looked a little bit further into it. And then about a year or two ago, myself and Joseph Schor are like, this doesn't make sense, right? Like, this doesn't really make sense, because the first Columbus Day was in 1792, right? Like, I started saying that. I was like, well, it's not the first Columbus Day. It's not the first Columbus Day. It doesn't really make sense as an argument. And then Joseph Schor is like, we should look a little deeper into this and see what Harrison actually said. So we started digging in, seeing what Harrison was saying, making connections like, wait a second, this has nothing to do with Italians. So I might have said that there, and that's wrong. But the kind of, I look at this trajectory in this development. What I want to dissertate on is how newspapers like Il Progresso and were covering Italy's colonial project, and how were they framing this to Italian Americans, right? And I really want to understand how different sectors of Italian America were responding to Italy's colonial ventures, right? In terms of things like race, in terms of things like empty land narratives around Somalia, right? A lot of people have written about Ethiopia. Very few have. In Ethiopia, in the Italian American press is pretty well documented, but not a lot of people are talking about Eritrea, Libya, and Somalia, which were also Italian colonies in Africa, right? And the kind of rhetoric. So for my comps, I looked into how fascist Italy was selling these projects. And now they give me an understanding of how historians view or understand the fascist project. And what I want to understand is how Italian Americans view these projects. And there's really kind of two major groups within Italian America in this kind of time period. There's the prominenti, which means the prominents, who control the press, the industries, the fraternal organizations, right? And the kind of people who follow them, who you're like professional managerial classes people. And then there's this other group, which is smaller, and the one that I really like we need to talk more about them. And they're called the sottoversivi, the subversives, right? And this is basically everyone on the left, right? These are the people organizing unions, and it's across a broad spectrum. There's communists, there's anarchists, and there's socialists, and those things really meant a big difference back then, right? Because like the communists and anarchists were fighting with each other. The anarchists and anarchists were fighting with each other between followers of Luigi Galliani, who was a kind of insurrectionary anarchist, and this other guy, Carlo Tresca, who's, as I keep emphasizing, I think is the most important Italian American in our history. Back to our saying, yeah, so I want to look at how these different groups, right? And then there's like the Catholics and Protestants, right? There's a whole Protestant Italian American community. There's Waldensians, but then there's also Italian Anglicans, right? There's an Italian Anglican church down in Little Italy. It's now a Ukrainian church. There's this whole entire Pentecostal sect that was established by Italian Americans. God's Assembly, something along the lines of that. They're based in the Bronx, but they're international. A ton of Italian Brazilians, right? By this guy Francone, right? I want to see what all of these different groups, and through their presses, right, how they were responding and who was supporting and who was against, and how they were. And I really want to understand that. How did Italian Americans understand Italian colonialism, right? Because I said lots is written about Ethiopia, a lot is written about the perspective from Italy, but nothing in the American diaspora. So that's what I'm going to look at.
That is so cool, man. Well, that is awesome. I really appreciate your work an awful lot. So last question, and this will be kind of more of a fun one because we spent a lot of time on the bad guys, I feel like. So I want to close on I guess maybe a little bit of hope here. So during your October project, you kind of did. I think it was every day. I mean, every day. Different, yeah. And so in that theme, would you please highlight one person that maybe it's your favorite, or maybe it's just your favorite story, or just one that sticks out to you that you kind of want to leave people with of a kind of leftist and Italian American culture that they should dive more into?
So I'm going to tell you a figure and then a story about him. Great. So as I keep referencing Carlo Tresca. So Carlo Tresca was a socialist newspaper editor in Italy who is charged with libel and runs away to the U.S. He always had an intention to go back to Italy, never does, but he always had this kind of intention to go back, as did the majority of Italian Americans at that time period, right? And in the U.S., he kind of transitions from socialism to anarcho-syndicalism, right, which is basically organizing society around unions, right? He never formally joins the International Workers of the World, the IWW, but he does participate and organize with them, and throughout the annals of his life, he's always being the kind of, he's from like a middle class family in Italy. He's working class in the U.S., but he's always being the kind of champion of Italian Americans. What do I mean by that? He's fighting against the obvious thing, capitalist exploitation, right? That's the obvious thing. Along with that kind of ethnic discrimination, right? Those two things are obvious. He also calls out Italian Americans within our own community, whether it be the mafia, whether it be Generoso Pope, whether it be the Italian consulates, whether it be a local priest. He fought back against anyone who was exploiting or dominating Italians within and from out the community. So people outside the community like Rockefeller, he's going to call that guy out. People within the community like Generoso Pope are literally mafia figures. He would be like, yeah, you're exploiting our community. You're bad. Basically, anyone who exploited Italian Americans, he would organize against and opposed. He led multiple strikes. He led the second wave of the Lawrence Silk Strike. If you're going to have one moment in Italian American history, that you're like, this is our moment, right? There was a major strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And the strike is won, right? And this is a multi-ethnic strike. It's Syrians, Italians, Irish, Eastern European Jews, native workers. The IWW organizes all of them, and they win a massive strike. And the local police arrest Joseph Ettore, Arturo Giovanetti, who are the two Italian-American leaders of that strike, right? They arrest them to punish them for winning that strike, right? And what happens is, basically the IWW is like, this is ridiculous. Why are you arresting these people? So they call Carlo Tresca up, who's a really good organizer, right? And Carlo Tresca is able to convince the workers who just won their strike to go back on strike to free Ettore and Giovanetti and his other guy Caruso, right? And it's a level of working class solidarity that up to that point was never seen before. And I don't even think it was ever repeated again, even in the 30s at the time of the sit-down strike, where you win a strike and then you go out and strike again. And a story that I would love to share is he was organizing workers out in the Masabi Iron Range. And Tresca eventually gets assassinated by this mafia figure, Carmine Galante, and it's assumed that was the person who did it, never solved, but it makes the most sense, and most likely under the kind of authority of Generoso Pope. The story I like the most about him, though, is that to show you the kind of character he has, is he was organizing workers out in the Iron Ranges. It's Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, right? And Max Eastman, who was a kind of really weird American intellectual, tells this story that why they were doing it, they were being intimidated by these basically like white supremacists, pro super hyper capitalist white supremacists who hated immigrant workers, right? And they were following Tresca and a comrade in the truck, right? And the guy in the truck is like, oh man, they're going after us. And Tresca goes to him basically, no, they're going after me, right? So he walks outside the truck, beside the truck, and he's like, you're going to come here for me? I'm here, right? Basically, he doesn't say that, but by doing this gesture. And someone sees him do this, right? And they yell out in Italian, coraggio, courage, right? And that's really this figure that I admire, because he was doing it nominally for the working class, right? He wasn't like sitting there like, oh, I am the champion of Italian American. Though I'd certainly view himself as a champion of the working class. However, through his class politics, right? And this is a really great essay by Phil Conestraro, rest in peace, who talks about is that through his defending of the Italian American working class, he was ultimately also defending like the kind of ordinary everyday practices of Italian Americans against this kind of unionarrative. As time goes on, this kind of unionarrative from the kind of pro-fascist Italian American elite. So if you want to have one Italian American look to, and of course, he's a product, right? He's limited, right? He was kind of misogynist. He cheated on his wife. Like there's these things, right, that he's like all people, they're problematic. But in terms of his political action, right, someone who we can look to in terms of a political action and an admirable figure, I always say Carlo Tresca. And we've done 2 memorial services. Myself and Joseph Schor, I mentioned earlier, have done 2 memorial services for his at the corner where he was assassinated. And as long as I'm alive in New York City, I'm going to continue to do that every 5 years, because his memory deserves to be lived, and to be remembered. He deserves to be remembered. And it's interesting because through my advocacy for Carlo Tresca, and you can Google Steve Cerulli, Carlo Tresca, and see whatever I've done. I've also managed to become close with some people out in Italy who are doing the same thing. And there's a bus, there's a piazza, and a couple of years ago, they put a plaque in front of his house and said Carlo Tresca was born here.
Where's that in Italy?
This is in Sulmona, Italy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the town next to where my grandmother grew up. So I also have a attachment as well. And his brother was the doctor of my grandmother's hometown. So I also have this little bit of sentimental connection as well. I'm not from Sulmona, but like I've been to Sulmona many times. So I would say Carlo Tresca, like he's our guy. And there's lots of other people who've done fantastic things like Angela Bambace and Judy Bari. But in terms of impact, Tresca is our guy. Like he's our figure.
That's amazing. So, where can people go to learn more about your work?
I mean, I'm on Instagram. I'm not particularly designed it in a way to be like an information page. It's like a personal Instagram account that I sometimes do stuff on. But places to look at is the Calandra Institute, which is one of my places of employment. Not everything there is necessarily progressive, right? It's kind of just an Italian American think tank. There is no place where you're like, where do you want to do Italian American progressive stuff, other than this organization Piace, founded by John Avaluto in Brooklyn. It's kind of brand new. It's Italian for Zoran. There's South Philly Italian radicals. So there are a few. There's a couple of other ones too, like these like people who are interested in like the witchcraft and Southern folk traditions and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of like, that's like kind of like lefty stuff. And then in terms of like rigorous academic research, as I said, there's the Calandra Institute. There's the Italian American Studies Association. It's just like rigorous academic research. I mean, peer reviewed. There's the Italian American Review, which is a journal. There's Diasporic Italy, which is the journal of the Italian American Studies Association. So there is people producing work on this. There's the SUNY Italian American Studies Press. There's the Fordham Italian American Studies series, SUNY, Fordham, Routledge, and Prague. No, what's that one with the P? There's a couple of presses out there too. The Italian American Studies Association website will have all of it. And again, this isn't necessarily all progressive. It's just a rigorous academic study of Italian Americans. And then places like Piace, Italian for Zoran, South Philly, Italian American radicals, or there's another group out in Massachusetts who did they had a book about Medusa. Her name's Maria Molteni, who've done some stuff. There's Italian Americans for Indigenous Peoples Day. There's these small spots here or there, but there isn't the IWW Italian section that's called, or the Italian local in the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which were things at one time.
Well, Steve, thanks so much for doing this.
You want to do that last question?
What are you referring to?
They said the fun a closing note.
Oh no, that was it. Yeah, no, that was it. Yeah.
No, that wasn't my closing note. Can I say it?
Yeah, of course you can.
To know history is one thing, right? A lot of Italian Americans nominally know our history. We were discriminated against. We struggled, that kind of stuff. But to understand our history is the real struggle, right? Because if you're going to look at Italian American history and be like, we were treated bad and now I'm going to treat other people bad, you may know the history, but you don't understand it.
That was Steve Cerulli. Check out all of his stuff. A lot of resources there. A lot of, man, I am looking forward to a deep dive. I thought I knew the basics around all that stuff, but man, that was eye-opening. That was really, really eye-opening. Music for the 1000 Podcast is provided by Andrew Saxonov. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, would you? And write up a review. It really helps get the word out about this show. And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you do so over at patreon.com/romplacone. For a Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool perks. We do a Zoom hangout once a month. You get full stand-up clips not available anywhere else. It's all for a Give What You Can level. We got a really cool community going on over on Patreon. All right, 115. We are that much closer. We are midway through a decade, about to approach another decade, and this is a really interesting topic heading into the holidays, especially for those of you with Italian American backgrounds like myself. This is a lot to reflect on. All right, catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.